Heyo! Hello, people of Earth and beyond. A warm welcome to all my Trafalmadorian friends out there. Big brother, I know you're watching this. If you're new to my channel, my name is Shannon, and today I'm going to be talking about The Rose Society by Marie Lu. Last week I did a video review of The Young Elites, which is the first book in this series, and I was so excited to start the second book, and I had it already, and I kind of looked at the back cover and I realized that the one I had, The Midnight Star, was the third book. So I had to go to my local bookstore and buy this as soon as I could, and I bought it and read it in a week. Anyway, that's a tangent, and I just wanted to share my general thoughts on this book and the series in general so far. Haven't read the third book yet, but this is not going to be a normal review for me because I'm not going to talk about the plot and the writing a whole lot because a lot of what I have to say is the same as the first book. Like, I still think the world building is really good. We'll get into it in just a second. But I mostly, in this review, want to talk about the characters. So, with that, let's just kind of dive in. I'm not going to be worrying about spoilers. Like, I'm not going to do a spoiler-free thing. We're just going to go all spoilers with this one because I don't honestly know how to talk about this plot without saying any spoilers. So, if you haven't read the book yet, go read it and then watch this video. Alright, I do briefly want to talk about the writing, starting with the imagery. If you watched my last review, you know that the imagery is one of the things I said this book really did well. That's an area where this book, this writing style, really shone. Shined? And there was a lot of really good, vivid description in this book. However, there was not quite as much of it as I would like. Mostly for me, it was she didn't describe the settings, like the places they were in, very much, and so sometimes I had a hard time being grounded because I just needed a little more imagery about where they were. Like, when they entered the throne room, I would have liked a better visual of what the throne room looks like. I know it was a tension-filled scene and she was focused on the action and what was going on, but it was like, you can take a few seconds to give me a really good idea of what this place looks like. That's probably a personal preference thing. It was, I just thought the imagery wasn't quite as good in the scenes where there was a lot going on, like in the battle scene when they're in the storm and they're on the back of the Boleras. Yeah, I thought the imagery there was good and very vivid and I was really drawn in. But in other places, I thought I needed more. I guess I'm a very visual reader. I like to have a very clear image in my head of what's happening and what the scenery looks like. But the scenes where there was really intense stuff going on, especially when Adelina was having her hallucinations, the imagery there was good. I also want to briefly talk about the world building, and that was another area last time where it really shone through. The world building was beautiful, and I'm not going to say it wasn't good in this book, but I felt like it wasn't added to at all. Even with bringing in Maeve and the Beldish princes and all that, like, we didn't see a whole lot of the Beldish culture, and if you read the epilogue of the Young Elites, everything we saw in this book about the Beldish was kind of already established in that book. Lastly, for the writing, I want to talk about the plot. So, in my last video, I thought that the plot of the first book sounded a little bit familiar. Not so with this one. I don't think I have ever read a book where the main character is plotting to take over the throne. So there was a resurrection trope with bringing Enzo back, but I think that Marie Lu put an interesting twist on it, so I'm not mad about that, and I'm really interested to see how the relationship between Enzo and Adelina plays out in the third book. Well, I'll talk about them in just a second. But anyway, back to the plot. Really, the plot is fairly simple, and I think that's good. I think it really works because a lot of the main focus of this story, other than Adelina trying to get the crown, is the fact that she's battling her own inner demons and trying to control her powers constantly and dealing with all this darkness within herself. And I'm going to talk more about that when I talk about the characters, because I have to talk about her, undoubtedly. But the simple plot that they have, like, there are really only two big events in the plot, and that is bringing Enzo back from the dead and then eventually storming the castle, that big battle scene, the climax, and her finally getting the throne. And that simple plot leaves a lot of room for Adelina to focus on everything that's going on internally, which I thought was all done incredibly well. One thing that bothered me about the plot, it doesn't really matter, but just something in Adelina's reasoning is she actually has no claim to the throne whatsoever. That's just kind of the way that monarchies work, is that you have to have some kind of blood connection. Like, you have to be related to the royal family usually, unless you just take over, which she did. So, like, in the end, it didn't really matter because it was a mutiny, coup d'etat. But the other thing is, like, she kind of hinted at ruling by Enzo's side, which would have to admit bringing him back from the dead, and I'm not sure how she thought that was going to work. In the end, it didn't matter, so, like, I guess that's not really a loose thread, but, like, I want to point out that sometimes there were some faults in Adelina's reasoning. Before we move into the characters, I just want to say briefly that everything I would say for the writing is pretty much the same. I still love the writing style. I think present tense works really well for this story, and it still bothers me a little bit when present tense is from third person, but that's fine. Most of the time it's from first person, it's from Adelina's point of view. But the imagery and the world building I think are still good. I would have liked to see a little bit more of them in this book, but overall the writing is fantastic. So let's start talking about the character. Actually, I lied. We're going to talk about the romances first. Just because I want to get that out of the way. I don't really like romance, but I feel like it's very necessary to talk about the ones in this series. Alright, first let's discuss the love triangle that we have going on between Adelina, Enzo, and Maggiano. Something that Marie Lu does very well is to take a trope and twist it and do something unexpected with it. And I really appreciate that, especially with this little love triangle that's kind of going on at the end of this book and is demolished. But anyway, I said in my last video I didn't really like the romance between Enzo and Adelina. I didn't think they were the best fit, and I'll get to just that in just a second. But I'm really glad, first of all, that she didn't have both Enzo and Maggiano just in love with Adelina unconditionally. Because she broke up the love triangle, just disrupted it entirely, I think this is the only love triangle that I have ever really accepted and been okay with. Like, it is a trope that I absolutely despise. Most of the time it's just boring and I just don't care. So I'm really glad that she didn't go into the, they're both in love with her thing. That being said, I want to look at Enzo's side of it really quickly. I said in my last video that I didn't really think the romance between Adelina and Enzo was necessary. Like, it was just kind of there, and I didn't think they were the best match, even though, he respected her, and so I really appreciated that. So if it had continued, I would have supported it for that aspect, but of course with everything Adelina's done and just all the bad feelings between them, there was no way that was going to happen. Anyway, I'm getting a little off topic of what I actually want to talk about with it. Everything that happened in this book, in all of everything that Adelina is feeling, all the guilt and betrayal and all that, I actually understand why the romance was there, even though I don't think it's the best romance I've ever read. That that betrayal from Enzo during the climax, where after he's found out everything, that's another punch to the gut that really, really sends her spiraling down. And so I guess it was necessary to give her that last thrust toward just really being a villain. And so I appreciate it for that aspect, I suppose. However, I don't think that Adelina and Enzo were ever in love or really even close to it. There was attraction there was maybe a little bit of infatuation there, but ultimately, I think it was lust. The definition of lust is using someone else's body for your own gain. And so I said in my last video that what their romance felt like was just pure passion. They're almost literally feeding off each other's energy. Anyway, so that to me felt very lustful, but then in this book, and you're still having some doubts, when she tethers herself to Enzo when he's brought back from the dead, she literally wants to use him. Like he's going to be her puppet. So she's literally planning on using his body, not in a sexual way, but she is using him for her own gain. And of course, in the first book, Adelina feels very used by him because she thinks he's only adding her to the daggers so that he can get his throne, whatever. So, yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Maggiano's side of the love triangle. And, I don't know how I feel about this either. On one hand, I really like, I guess the best way to say it is the effect that Maggiano has on Adelina, the way he calms her. I think he is a better person for her than Enzo. It's better for her to be around Maggiano than it is for her to be around Enzo. And that's just kind of, in putting it in Marie Lu's terms, because of their alignments with different energies and how there are different emotions and what feeds them and what quiets them. And Maggiano's presence, just as Violetta says, brings out the light in Adelina, which I think is, better than just burning your insides like Enzo does. That is such a weird way to say it, but that's literally what she describes it like. On the other hand, I don't really know what Maggiano sees in Adelina. Like, she is such a horrible person that I don't know why exactly he's in love with her and wants to protect her. Alright, one more romance to talk about before we get into just talking about some characters. The romance between Lucent and Maeve. I don't know that it was bad exactly, but I don't know I was there. So I know romantic subplots are a thing, and they take up space in your novel, and people get invested in them. I don't typically care. It doesn't really matter to me. But it kind of felt to me like it was just there for representation. Like, it did not add anything. Like, I mean, Lucent and Maeve could have just been friends, and Lucent still could have been blamed for Tristan's death and banished. So the actual romance of it, I think, was just there for representation, which is not really the best thing, in my opinion. Not not that representation isn't the best thing, but just like adding something in just so you can say that you represented someone. Also, I have to add that it's not a romance that I particularly like, just because I don't like Maeve. Lucent's fine, but I think Maeve is a horrible person. So I don't really don't really like the romance there. Okay, characters. First, I want to talk about Michel. And if you're going, what's there to talk about? Or who's that? That's exactly why I want to talk about him. So, I again said in my last video that some of the daggers were just kind of there, and we didn't get to explore their personalities a whole lot. We learned a little bit more about Lucent, and Gemma was kind of there, and then she died. But Michel is the one that aggravates me the most, because we know literally nothing about him other than he's an artist, and he's just kind of there for plot conveniences. Like, occasionally he will make something disappear from one place and appear in another place. And it's only done when, like, Mary Lou wants to put Adelina at a disadvantage by taking away her dagger, or whatever. Like, he's literally there for plot convenience, and I have a problem with that. Not because I'm really invested in Michel, but just because I really don't like the fact that he doesn't have a personality. I think that if he's there at all, he needs to be expanded upon. And in the first book was very short, so there was a lot of room to get to know the daggers. She could have added a few pages where Adelina just, hangs out with them and gets to know them a little bit, and that would have been fine. I would have been more sad about Gemma's death if I knew her a little better. Like, she was okay and she was kind of there, but again, pretty flat. Alright, I want to talk about Maggiano because he's my favorite character. He's adorable. Okay, he's just adorable, and he reminds me of Bartimaeus. And again, he's not particularly fleshed out. I feel like there is a lot more to him than we get on the surface level, so I'm really hoping that we learn more about him in the third book. But he's just one character in this series that I really just love everything he does, because again, he reminds me of Bartimaeus, the love of my life, but also he just, I don't know, he's just kind of adorable. Also, really quickly, I really like the fact that he was actually in the first book without our knowing. He was Adelina's cellmate, and I like kind of the history they realize that they have. I think something Marie Lu does incredibly well is plans for the next book. Like, there are a lot of things from this book that tie into the last book, and I like the progression of everything is really well done and really thought out, and so I appreciate that, and I really appreciate that she planned for Maggiano to come into the picture. Raphael, I'm taking this horse by the reins, make you break coats, wrap it with blood stains. You can tell I'm not a rapper. Anyway, so Raphael, I did not expect to like Raphael at first. Like, in the first book, I kind of just thought, he's okay. Like, when we met him, I thought, oh boy. Oh boy. That's generally my reaction when you meet characters in a brothel, is, oh boy. But in the first book, we get a little hint of the fact that he is a layered character, with him saying, like, if Enzo becomes king, I can leave this life behind, and just the sadness that we see in him when he thinks of, being a consort, and that's really expanded upon in this book. First of all, I'm really glad that we got his backstory. And I feel for him. He's one of the few characters that I really feel a lot of empathy for. It's hard for me to actually like characters in this book because a lot of them are on borderline awful people. But Raphael is one that I think is deserving of all the sympathy I can give. I thought that he was just going to be a promiscuous, pretty boy and someone that I could not personally relate to. But again, Marie Lu really subverted my expectations, and he just... I don't even know how to describe it. I appreciate how complex she made him. Alright, the last character I want to talk about is actually Adelina. And for this one, I'm going to try to keep it to this book, but I want to actually read the acknowledgments because I think that's the best way to describe what happens to her in this book. So, The Rose Society is the darkest book I've ever written. Taking Adelina down to a place where she not only lets her pain consume herself, but consume others was a necessary task, but it was also an emotionally difficult one. Being in the headspace of a villain in training for months at a time meant seeking out the best hearts I know in order to balance out all the negativity. So, the author says it best, of course. They always do. But Adelina is possibly one of the most intriguing protagonists I've ever read from. And she is not at all a good person. I feel a little bit of sympathy for her because I know her backstory. I know that she was abused. I know a lot of people have turned their backs on her, and I understand how that can drive her down the path she's gone. And honestly, I think that's done very well. Like, I'm not excusing her actions, but I think the progression that she goes from just being a helpless daughter with an abusive father to a powerful dagger to eventually a villainous queen, I think that's all logical based on what's happened to her. The trauma that she's felt from her past, coupled with her powers that thrive on darkness and dark energy, really set her up to be a perfect villain. And this is the first villain that I've actually read from, like, a villain protagonist that I've ever read from. And no, Artemis Fowl does not count. Most of this book is focused on her progression down this dark path. And again, that's why I really like the simple plot, because it gives the book room to really explore what Adelina is feeling. And I think it's all done just so well. I can't think of another word to describe it. Like, it's almost, it is a thing of beauty how Marie Lu writes it and how everything takes a logical step. And it's not really the path that you want Adelina to go down, but it's, from her point of view, it makes perfect sense why she just gives up on being good. So with that, the last thing I want to talk about is whether or not she deserves a redemption arc. And I kind of want to say no. I don't think she deserves a whole arc of redemption. I think maybe at the end she should feel some remorse. I think her dying at the end of the series is a very real possibility and might be the best option. I really hope that at some point she feels some remorse and kind of just gives up the darkness, but I don't really see everything being okay. I don't think she can ever come to peace with the daggers. Or create a truce with the daggers. There's too much bad blood there. And I really hope at some point she just, I have a little bit of hope for her because, you know, at the end of the book, this book ends with, let me see if I can find it. Bear with me. I force a smile onto my face. In the silence, I sit alone on my throne and wait eagerly for all of the satisfaction and triumph to hit me. I wait and wait and wait, but it doesn't come. So that gives me a little bit of hope that at the end she'll kind of realize that this darkness is not the way to go. However, her becoming a good person in the end, making everything right, that's a little bit doubtful. So that's gonna be all I have for this. Like I said, it wasn't a normal review, but it was fun, and I did enjoy the book. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first one. It was really intense, and it was a book where I really wanted to find out what happened and get to the end, but there weren't a lot of enjoyable moments. I didn't laugh a lot, which is just kind of understandable with this story. And I'll be honest, it kind of scared me sometimes with how intense the darkness was. And so I don't know that I'd ever read it again. Like, I like this series, but this book was just really, really intense. Anyway, I do recommend it. I recommend this series in general. So that's all I have, and I will see you next time when I'm hopefully reviewing The Midnight Star. Bye!